The parking garage at St. Emmet's Medical Center was never fully lit after midnight. Half the fluorescent tubes had been flickering for months, maintenance tickets filed and ignored. And by the time Sergeant Claire Novak finished her overnight shift in the trauma ward, the walk to her car felt like moving through something underwater. That particular exhaustion that sits behind your eyes and makes the whole world look slightly wrong. She had 12 years behind her, 4 of them in the Army, attached to a forward surgical team in Kandahar, where she learned that the human body could survive things that had no business being survived. 8 more at St. Emmet's in Dayton, Ohio, where she learned the same lesson in a different building with better lighting and worse coffee. She was 34 years old, and she moved through hospital corridors, the way people move through places they know too well, automatically, without looking, her mind already somewhere else. That night, somewhere else was her kitchen table. Groceries she needed to buy. A text from her mother she hadn't answered. The particular silence of a Tuesday night apartment where nobody was waiting up. She heard the dog before she saw him. Not barking. Something lower than that. A sound that didn't belong in a parking garage. Somewhere between a whine and a growl. The sound of an animal trying to hold itself very still while everything in its body said run. Claire stopped walking. She'd spent enough time around working dogs in Afghanistan to know that sound. Military working dogs made it when they were hurt and trying not to show it. When they were scared and trying not to show that either. It was the sound of an animal that had been trained out of weakness and was now somewhere in the dark between the parked cars. Fighting that training with everything it had left, she followed it. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, maybe 70 pounds, wearing a tactical vest with a unit patch she didn't immediately recognize. He was crouched between a pickup truck and a concrete pillar, and he was bleeding from his right shoulder, not pouring, but steady, dark against his fur. Someone had tied a makeshift bandage around it, with what looked like a strip torn from a shirt. The knot was military. Someone who had been trained had done that, someone who knew what they were doing, and had done it fast, under pressure. There was a man sitting on the ground beside the dog, his back against the concrete pillar, his legs stretched out in front of him. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a gray t-shirt, but he had the particular stillness of someone who had learned to conserve everything, energy and breath and sound, down to the smallest possible amount. He was holding the dog's head in both hands very gently, and he was talking to him in a voice so quiet Claire had to take 3 steps closer before she could hear it. "You're okay," he was saying. "You're okay, boy. I've got you. I've got you." He looked up when she got close enough. His eyes were the flat, careful kind, not unfriendly, just a man who'd learned to assess first and react second. He took in her scrubs, her hospital badge, the trauma scissors clipped to her pocket. His shoulders came down maybe half an inch. "He's losing blood," the man said. "Not a request, just information, delivered the way soldiers delivered information, without inflection, because inflection cost time. I can see that." Claire crouched down. "What happened?" "Somebody came at us in the east stairwell. Knife. Titan got between us." He paused. "Titan always gets between us." The dog turned his head toward Claire when she reached out her hand, let her smell it, then allowed her to touch the bandage. He was shaking, very slightly, the kind of shaking that wasn't cold and wasn't fear exactly. It was the body coming down off adrenaline, trying to remember how to be still. "You're a vet?" she asked. "Master Sergeant Dale Merritt, retired." He said it without emphasis, the way men said things that were true and complicated at the same time. Titan's been with me 6 years. He was Army before that. 3 tours. Claire looked at the bandage. Looked at the dog's breathing, shallow but steady. She looked back at Merritt and saw something she recognized. Had seen it before in Kandahar, on the faces of men waiting for news. That particular expression of someone who has already decided they will be okay no matter what they're told, and is just waiting to hear what they'll have to be okay about. I need to get him inside, she said. They won't let a dog in the... I know what the policy is. She was already standing, already calculating. Come on. What happened in the next 4 minutes, she would not remember clearly afterward. She remembered motion, the weight of her badge against her chest, the sound of Titan's paws on linoleum, the particular look on the face of the security guard at the service entrance, a man named Torres, who had worked the night shift for 11 years and had, in that time, developed the wisdom to know when something was beyond his pay grade. She remembered saying something to him, something direct and possibly not entirely polite, and she remembered the way he stepped back and let them through. She got Titan into a treatment bay in the back of the ER. She closed the curtain. The wound was clean. The blade had caught the muscle at the top of his shoulder, missed everything important. It needed irrigation and closure and antibiotics and about 12 hours of rest that a dog like Titan would have to be physically forced to take. Claire had spent 4 years closing wounds in a tent in the desert. She knew what she was doing. Her hands remembered. Merritt stood at the foot of the table and held Titan's head, and kept talking in that quiet, even voice, and Titan watched him the whole time, never looked away from him once. Afterward, when it was done, and Titan was lying on his side with his eyes half open, that specific dopey piece of an animal coming off mild sedation, Merritt said, "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," Claire said. "We still have to figure out what to do with him for the next." That was when the curtain opened. He was maybe 25, 26, wearing dark clothes. And he had the kind of face that had already decided something before he walked in. Claire saw the knife at the same moment she understood he'd followed them, had been watching, had seen where they went. Later, the police would piece together that he had a history with Merritt specifically. Something that had started 2 years ago, a dispute that had grown in his mind into something that made a kind of sense only to him. He had come to the hospital that night, looking for Merritt. He had found the dog instead in the stairwell. And the dog had done what it was trained to do, and now the dog was sedated, and Merritt was on the wrong side of the table, and there was a nurse in between. Claire didn't make a decision. There was no moment of consideration. She moved before she finished understanding what was happening. Stepped into the space between the man and Merritt, got her hands up, and felt the first impact before she felt the pain. The second came faster than the first. She heard Merritt's voice from somewhere behind her. Not words, just the sound of a man whose body has arrived at a situation before his mind has finished processing it. She heard a crash. She felt the third impact and went down to one knee and put her hand on the table to stay up. She would think later that she had been afraid, must have been afraid. But she didn't remember fear exactly. What she remembered was a kind of compression. Everything shrinking down to the next 3 seconds, the next half second. That narrowing of focus she had first learned in Afghanistan when a trauma case came in and everything else became irrelevant. The world got very small and very clear, and there was no room in it for anything except what needed to happen next. The fourth and fifth came when she was already trying to turn away. And then there was a sound that was not human, a sound that Titan made. She would not have thought a sedated dog could make that sound, would not have thought a dog that had just been sutured and medicated could move that fast. And then there was shouting and running feet in the corridor, and Torres, the security guard, bless him, Torres, who had stepped back and let them through, and had then apparently followed at a careful distance, because 11 years of night shifts had given him a particular understanding of when things were about to go wrong. Claire sat down on the floor. She sat down, not because she decided to, but because her legs made the decision for her. And she put her back against the table and looked up at the fluorescent light on the ceiling and thought with the strange clarity of someone whose body is running on something other than conscious thought. I need to tell Torres to call a trauma team. I need to tell them about thee. Then Merritt was beside her, his hands already on her, already applying pressure, his voice saying her name, which she had told him maybe 20 minutes ago, while she was washing her hands and he was watching her work on his dog. Novak, hey, stay with me, Claire. I'm here, she said. I'm fine. You are not fine. I know, she said. I just needed to say it. She was in surgery for 3 hours. She didn't know that at the time. She knew the ceiling of the trauma bay and the particular sound of people around her moving fast and competently. And she knew the cold of the IV line. And she knew that at some point Merritt was no longer beside her, had been removed by someone, and she felt that absence the way you feel a sound stopping, as a sudden awareness of something that had been there. She woke up in a room that had a window. It was daylight, and for a moment she thought she was in Kandahar. The quality of light was wrong for that, too clean, too northern. And then she saw the ceiling tiles and remembered. Her colleague Paige was sitting in the chair by the window. Paige had worked with Claire for 6 years and had the particular expression of someone who has been very frightened and has now converted that fear through sheer force of will into the appearance of calm. Hey, Claire said. Hey yourself, said Paige. How long? About 9 hours since surgery. You're going to be fine. 2 of the 5 were significant. The others were. Paige stopped, breathed. You should have left, Claire. You should have gotten out. There wasn't anywhere to go. That's not. Paige. Paige stopped. Where's Titan? Something shifted in Paige's expression. She stood up, and she went to the door, and she opened it. And she said something to someone in the hallway, and then the door swung wider, and Merritt came in, and he was carrying Titan, 70 pounds of Belgian Malinois, bandaged shoulder, the patient expression of a dog who has decided to allow himself to be carried. And he set him very carefully on the bed beside Claire, and Titan immediately put his head on her stomach and closed his eyes. They wouldn't let him in the room, Merritt said. I've been having a conversation with hospital administration for about 3 hours. How'd that go? I can be very persistent. Claire put her hand on Titan's head. Titan's tail moved once, slowly, against the blanket. The man who, she started, in custody, last night. Merritt's voice was even. He won't be a problem. How long? DA's looking at aggravated assault, attempted murder. His history with me. The surveillance footage from the stairwell. He paused. A long time, Claire, a long time. She let out a breath she had been holding, she thought, since somewhere around the 4th impact. She slept again after that, and when she woke, the room was different. Paige was gone. Merritt was still there, asleep in the chair by the window, with his arms crossed and his head tilted back, and Titan was still beside her, head still on her stomach, breathing in that deep, even way of an animal that has decided the current situation is safe. The third time she woke, it was to a sound she didn't understand at first. It was a low sound, building, not in the room, but outside it, in the corridor, and then outside the corridor, in the broader space of the ward, a kind of gathering. She looked at Merritt, who was awake now, and who was looking at the door with an expression she couldn't read. "What is that?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. The sound was footsteps, not the ordinary footsteps of a hospital, staff moving fast, visitors moving uncertain, but a rhythm, measured, the sound of a large number of people moving together in a particular way, the sound of people who had learned to move together, had spent years learning exactly that until it was in their bodies like a heartbeat. Paige appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were wet. "There's someone here to see you," she said. Claire looked at Merritt. "When it got out," he said quietly, "about what you did, I didn't make calls, Claire. I sent one message to one person, someone I served with, and I told him what happened. That was it. I don't know how it got from there to—" He stopped, looked at the door. "I don't know how it got from there to this." Paige opened the door fully. The hallway was full of men and women in uniform. Not all Army. She could see Navy, Marines, a couple of Air Force. Some were in dress uniform, some in civilian clothes, but the posture was the same. That particular straightness that doesn't fully leave a person. They were standing in rows that extended down the corridor in both directions as far as she could see. And when the door opened, they all turned toward it with the same movement, the same orientation. A compass needle swinging toward north. One of them, a woman, mid-40s, a lieutenant colonel's oak leaf on her collar, stepped forward to the doorway. "Sergeant Novak," she said. "I'm a nurse," Claire said. "I got out 6 years ago." "Yes, ma'am," the lieutenant colonel said. "You are. We know exactly what you are." She paused. "We're here because we know exactly what you are." Claire looked at them, all of them, the rows of faces, the flags pinned to lapels and sleeves, the expressions that were not quite smiling but were something adjacent to it, something warmer and more complicated than a smile, relief and gratitude, and something she recognized from the faces of soldiers who had come off a bad night and were standing in the light on the other side of it. Dayton lifted his head off her stomach. He looked at the door. His tail began to move. There were, she would learn later, over 200 of them. They had come from 5 states. Some had driven through the night. One had taken a red-eye from Seattle, had still been in the air when he got the message, had landed in Columbus, and driven straight to Dayton without stopping. A woman from Fort Campbell had brought flowers and left them at the nurse's station, with a note that said only, "For anyone here who needed them." Nobody had coordinated it. No one had made a list or sent a formal notification or organized a carpool. The message had moved the way these things move, one person to the next, each one knowing someone who needed to know, each one reading it and thinking, without deliberating, without calculating. "I have to go," and so they went. Claire Novak had spent 4 years in a forward surgical team learning what human beings were capable of. The full range of it. The things they could do to each other in darkness, and the things they could do for each other when the darkness passed. She had spent 8 more years in a trauma ward in Dayton, Ohio, learning the same thing in a different building. She had never, in either place, seen anything that looked quite like this hallway. She reached down and put her hand on Dayton's head. His tail kept moving, slow and steady, like something that had decided to keep going. "Thank you," she said, not to anyone specific, to the hallway, to the rows of faces, to the message that had moved from one person to the next through the night, until it reached 200 people who had gotten up and driven and flown and walked through hospital doors at 7 in the morning in Dayton, Ohio, because someone who didn't have to had stood in between. The lieutenant colonel nodded once. Titan put his head back down on her stomach, closed his eyes, and sighed. That deep, settling sigh of a dog who has decided that the current situation is good, is safe, is exactly where he is supposed to be.